didn't even talk about what we were going to talk about, so I'm just throwing this at you cold.
All right, let's have it.
I want to talk about perspective taking.
Okay, great.
And I know that you're a great person to talk about that, but I don't necessarily want to talk about perspective taking for individuals who are on the spectrum.
Okay.
Because what I see is once somebody is getting really good quality ABA, it at least becomes part of the discussion.
Right.
Teaching perspective taking to this individual. I want to know, how do we teach perspective taking to individuals who are not on the spectrum?
Right. Okay. Well, very interesting. And I don't know if you remember, but our workshop next Wednesday, this sounds like it was planned this way, but yeah, our workshop on Wednesday is specifically about that, teaching perspective taking. So it's perfect timing. Right. So, well, actually, the way that you teach perspective taking to folks off of the spectrum is the same as folks on the spectrum, right? And so I know we talk about, everyone in the autism community spends a lot of time talking about differences for folks on the spectrum, but there's a lot more similarities than there are differences, right? We're all human beings. The same basic principles of learning and motivation apply to all of us. So, some kids who are severely affected might require a lot more learning opportunities to learn the same skill. So, if you take a really simple example like just learning, object labels like, pen. When you see a pen, a 3-year-old child on the spectrum might require, several hundred, maybe even 1,000 trials of learning to really learn it and for it to maintain, whereas a typically developing child, they might get it in 1 trial or 2 trials or maybe 5 trials. But the basic process is the same. There's no difference. And actually, again, for folks off the spectrum, there's an analogy like if you wanted to teach me how to play, like let's say, basketball, or teach me how to be a good dancer, I'd probably require many tens of thousands of trials, right? Whereas if you take someone else who's really athletic, they might require only a few hours to actually get a fairly reasonable basic basketball playing repertoire, right?
Okay.
So same basic idea. But the way that we learn perspective taking is simply lots of practice opportunities of talking about what it's like to be in someone else's shoes versus what it's like to be in your shoes. And literally just taking turns thinking about what that person's thinking about versus thinking about what I'm thinking about. And so there's actually some decent research emerging now to show that this too is a learned behavior. Of course, the brain is involved, it's critically involved in perspective taking, and the brain is critically involved in every other type of thinking that you do as well, but it's still a learned skill. And typically developing kids might learn it relatively quickly, some more than others. There's some evidence that some major areas of psychopathology, perspective taking might be almost completely lacking in some folks with schizophrenia, for example, and personality disorders, some other areas that I'm not an expert in. But definitely there's a range in how well perspective taking abilities develop across different folks, whether you're on or off the spectrum. So think about friends of yours that are the most empathetic, the most emotionally involved in other people's lives, and then contrast them with people that you know that are the biggest jerks, basically, and all about themselves, you know what I mean? Every way that they look at the world, every experience they have in the world, they interpret it as, how is this experience about me? Okay? And basically there you have the two ends of the spectrum of perspective taking, right? And it doesn't matter if you're on or off the autism spectrum, you could be at either one of those ends, right? Most people are somewhere in the middle. Is that getting close to answering your question? I guess you want more practical advice.
Well, I think what I'm realizing is that it is the same for all of us, and that maybe my assumption is when somebody isn't on the spectrum that they would have gotten the perspective taken by now, and they haven't. And what I need to do is give them more opportunities, and I need to reinforce it. I need to be sneaky about it when it's adults who don't know that I'm trying to do something and change their behavior. Right. Well, I'm not going to introduce it and say, hey, today we're going to work on perspective taking for you, because you're not very good at it.
Well, and I'm just guessing here that you're probably talking about questions that moms often have about their husbands and how they can get their husbands to be more sensitive or more...
Actually, the thing that keeps coming up for us is that sometimes at schools that there is a lack of sensitivity to the fact that our kids are doing things differently and trying to get people to see... could you take the perspective of the child who's over here ever?
Okay, so we're actually developing a protocol. Next time you have Angela on the show, you should talk to her about it. Angela and I are developing a protocol for her doctoral dissertation that is going to be specifically to teach typically developing kids in school how to empathize and take the perspective of folks with disabilities.
Yeah.
And so basically, long story short, it's empathy involves the behavior of identifying how you are similar to someone else. And so the more that you identify similarities between yourself and others, the more you're going to empathize with them. And that is a behavior. Again, the brain's involved, but that's an active response. It's an active thing that you can do in your time on this earth is think about how you're similar to others.
Right.
All major religions, like the core value of every major religion on the earth is about that. It's about how are we all the same as human beings. And that's one thing at a really broad level. But at a more specific level, you could think about how am I similar to this one other person? And to the extent that you do that, you're going to have more empathy. Now, the opposite process, or it's the same process but done in the opposite direction, has the opposite effect. So the more that you think about how another human is different from yourself, the less you actually think about their perspective and the less you care about their perspective. So think about, it's an extreme example, but Nazi Germany.
Right.
What did the Germans do in terms of public relations to make it easier for the German citizenship to think that it's okay to kill Jewish people?
Well, they labeled them. They put the stars on them, and so that it was visible.
Right. So you're making it really tangible. This person is not you. This person is other than you. Okay.
Right.
They had all kinds of PR, public relations campaigns saying things like, Jewish people were subhuman. Right. Like they're almost not quite the same species. We saw a lot of that actually here in the United States with black versus white racism. That black people were talked about as having lower IQ or smaller brains or this or that or somehow not quite human. Right.
Huckleberry Finn. The culmination of that is when Jim cuts himself and Huckleberry sees you bleed the same color that I do. And he has the whole revelation, even though he's been on this adventure with this man who's saved his life, it isn't until he sees this is how we're the same.
Right. And that's exactly it. So that's an example of this person is similar to me or the same as me. Our blood is the same. Every major peace advocate that I'm aware of in human history, most of what they did was teach people about how your enemy is similar to you. So Gandhi was all about talking about how basic core human values and how we all have a mom. We all, get cold. We all get hungry. We all, want peace.
Yeah.
None of us really want war. Even warmongers don't really want war. They don't want to get hurt, right?
Right.
And so it's all about identifying similarities.
Okay.
For a kid, let's say a typically developing kid on the playground, in your average school, it might be something like, how is your peer with autism, or your peer in a wheelchair, or your peer on crutches, or whatever? How are they similar to you?
Okay.
A very childish, basic way of looking at things would be something like our politicians do all the time, which is pick something that's really obviously different and talk about that a lot, right?
Right.
But we want the opposite of that. So it might be something like, what do you guys both like to eat? If that's similar, that's something to talk about and focus on. What music do you guys both like? What is your favorite cartoon character? What hurt the most? Like, did you ever fall down and get hurt? How is that similar? And really, it's just a matter of identifying things that are similar. And then the more that you relate to someone else in terms of similarity, and that's a behavior, the relating behavior, the more that you're going to empathize with them. And your behavior is going to improve with respect to that person.
This is really powerful.
It's really exciting stuff. When you think it's a learned behavior, which means it's teachable. It's something you can actually do something about. It's not just an inborn quality, And when we look at kids, we might be tempted to think like, oh no, he's just naturally more empathetic. But if you look at the environment that they were raised in, if you look at how their parents act and what their parents talk about, what you might find is their parents spend a lot more time noticing good things about humans and about similarities between humans, and spend less time talking about what they hate about other people.